Hello and welcome to Navigating Thought Leadership. I'm Lucia Rahilly, Editorial Director at McKinsey Company, and your host for this series of live webinars sponsored by the Global Thought Leadership Institute at APQC. Quick note before we start, this series is designed to give you the opportunity to engage with some of the foremost leaders in the field of thought leadership today. We will be holding these webinars on a monthly cadence, and you can see our roster by visiting APQC's website, which is at apqc.org/GTLI. We would love for this to be as interactive as possible. Most of us in this racket genuinely love to talk shop. And so we invite you please to send along your questions using that Zoom chat functionality at the bottom of your screen, and I will attempt to field them to the degree that my multitasking abilities allow. Today, the amazing Francis Hintermann, Global Managing Director of Accenture Research and one of my fellow founding members at the Global Thought Leadership Institute. Thought leadership, I believe, falls into the research function at Accenture, and so is a critical part of Francis's bailiwick, and we are thrilled to have him here today to talk us through how thought leadership fits into Accenture's strategy, what kinds of storytelling they're experimenting with, what they're up to with Gen AI, and more. Francis, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. Well, good morning.
Let's start with some basics. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this kind of, research-driven publishing that falls into the idiosyncratic genre generally described as thought leadership.
It's a fair question. What brought me to that topic is that initially I was focused on adapting the sustainability issues to the European level, working as a consultant for the European Commission for French government as well. And it was all about how do we connect the long-term agenda of the planet with the short-term actions of companies. And to me, thought leadership was a conduit to actually connect the dots between long-term, short-term. That's really how I started.
Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of an interesting background, right? What do you think, what elements of that background prepared you for working in this field? And what would you recommend to folks who are coming up in thought leadership today? What are the traits that have contributed to your success in your view?
Success, I do not know. Let me share a failure. I guess we all learn from our failures, right? So let me share a failure because a few years later, after this experience I was mentioning, I was actually working on a committee for the French president. At the time, it was the President Sarkozy. And there was a special committee set up in order to boost economic growth in France. And the presidents decided to work with two consulting companies, your company and my company at the time. And so we're really working side by side. We define more than 300 actions that France should take in order to boost its economic growth. It was exactly 316. And one of them was very emblematic. It was about how we can enable Parisians to access a taxi. At the time, it was big issue. You have taxi when the weather is fine, comes the night, comes the rain, you don't find a taxi, right? And so with our colleagues from your company and my company, we made this extensive research about how to open the market. And we established guidelines and very sophisticated ones, which at the time we thought was going to be extremely successful. Now, France being France, at the time of the publication of a report, there was a demonstration of taxi drivers for good reasons. They were worried about the assets that they own, so their cars and their plates, with a reform. And the prime minister came to the TV that very night and said, "Do not worry, we will not implement that reform." Now, at about the same time, there was an American tourist in Paris, and that American tourist decided that tech innovation could provide a solution. And of course, that was Travis Kalanick, and he created Uber a year later. And then the taxi market was changed forever, right? So what I learned from that myself is that it was time for me and my team to get a lot more focused about technology innovation and how these constant technology disruption is going to have enormous business impact, and how we can help business leaders to anticipate the consequences of technology innovation. And that's really where we've been focused for the past decade.
Mm-hmm. So beyond that, forgive me my high school French zut alors moment there with the, with the taxis. It sounds like you really saw thought leadership as a fulcrum for real world impact there. I mean, real world change. So you experienced that firsthand.
No, exactly. And for me, it's a lot about that. It's about how we can translate to some extent technology issues, sustainability issues, and of course now we've got over different type of issues like geopolitical changes and so on and so forth. And we can see year after year, we measure at Accenture, we measure disruption. We've got what we call a disruption index, and we can see that disruption is growing year after year for different dimensions. And the point for me of thought leadership is how we absorb that and translate that into decisions that business leaders can take and change their companies to be more performing. So in a sense, it's embrace change and how they can absorb these business ideas and transform them into decisions that they take in their daily life.
Mm-hmm. So that illustrates why thought leadership matters to Accenture as a business, to your business strategy. Do most folks that you encounter in leadership level roles at Accenture agree that thought leadership is important in this way on its value, or have you had to wrestle with that hydra that is proving the value and ROI of this kind of content?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, of course. I would say that the paradox is that we can calculate the ROI pretty easily, in the sense that we can define metrics like you do in your company about the marketing impact, the social media impression, the downloads. We can add on top of that business indicators about the number of client meetings originated thanks to a thought leadership that we publish, conferences at which we are invited, mentioned in tier one media. And we can add all these indicators to prove the ROI. So that is, to me, not the most challenging aspect of it. The most challenging aspect is to compare an investment in thought leadership versus an investment in, say, a new chatbot versus an investment in, attending a conference versus other type of investment. So that's where the challenge is. And we are fortunate that we've got top leaders of a company who have been supporting thought leadership for many years. Actually, right now, if you look at who are the spokespeople of the thought leadership of Accenture, the CEO of Accenture, Julie Sweet, is our main spokesperson, and her direct support, of course, is trickling down through the organization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you spoke a little bit about what makes thought leadership successful in your context. What do you think makes it good? And how are those things different necessarily?
Yeah, it's a good question. What makes it good on our end, because of the specific, I would say the specific DNA of Accenture. First of all, because of our size, Julie always says that the first question she has from clients when she's presenting one of our thought leadership is about what are you doing yourself in your company? And so because of our size, we are committed to always try what we evangelize about on ourselves. So I would say that the first brick, building block that we put there is about testing what we preach on ourselves. The second one is the way we leverage data coming from the experience we have with clients around the world, given the spread of geographies, the type of function, industries in which we work. Legitimately, clients may ask about, what have you done before, which can prove that what you preach is actually happening and is successful. And the third bit is about the research that we develop, and we try to put as much rigor and discipline in the research to be extremely transparent on our hypothesis, on the data that we collect, on the way we analyze this data, working alongside academia around the world a lot. And even when we do not work with academia, being committed to publish the data that we collect and the methodology we've been using to analyze them in a transparent manner.
So you're in many ways describing a position that's fortunate, as I am also in at McKinsey, in which leadership already has seen the value of thought leadership, and there's not necessarily that existential need to prove the ROI of what thought leadership can do for a company. We, of course, hear again and again from many folks who confront this challenge of having to quantify the value of what they do in this field. Any suggestions for content leaders who are reckoning with this challenge now in terms of how to go about doing that?
Yeah, no, I've got this question from time to time when I discuss with colleagues in other organizations. And my point is always to look for what is the real differentiation of the organization that I work for, because we live in an era of democratization of the access of data to a large extent. So, nearly any organization can run a survey on any topic, whether it's a CXO survey or a consumer survey. What is going to really to make a difference is what the company has got to say, the specific hypothesis, the specific experience, the way to interpret the data. And so my advice is always this one, is about, really be truthful with yourself and find what is the differentiation of your company and dig on that. Because to me, it's the most interesting for all of us is to get that difference that, a company can bring.
Let's talk a bit now about the how of thought leadership. In other words, how folks can execute and what they can sort of do differently in order to take advantage of the value that thought leadership can offer. Some people in this field would call that unlocking value, a phrase I'm sure you're well familiar with. So let's start with where thought leadership sits within the organizational structure at Accenture. You lead research. How does that dovetail with marketing, brand, and so forth?
No, of course. So I'm in charge of developing the content for the thought leadership at Accenture, reporting to the Chief Strategy Officer of Accenture, Bhaskar Ghosh. And there is a reason why thought leadership and research is reporting to the CSO of the company. It's because we're there to support the development of a company, to support the revenue growth of a company. It's pretty clear and we're transparent about that. Of course, working very closely with business leaders. Every single piece of thought leadership is developed with business leaders of the different entities of a company, and working very closely with the marketing organization. So part of the work I do is reporting to Bhaskar Ghosh on one end and reporting to Jill Kramer, the CMO, on the other end, in the sense that every single piece of thought leadership that we develop, the marketing organization is in charge of bringing it to the market, is in charge of a selection of channels. So I'm working really side by side with many of my colleagues in marketing, including my peer in the marketing organization called Mark Appel.
And Francis, forgive me if you can't answer this, but how much do you view marketing as informing your research priorities? What does that sort of like mutual inflection look like, or is there a bright line between both? How do you view that?
It's a fair question. I would say it's a two-way street, and the collaboration with us is every day. There is not one day in which I will not have a contact or somebody in my team have a contact and discuss with our colleagues from marketing. So it's really working side by side. And it's extremely important because for the marketing organization, first of all, we collect information about what are the clients asking for in terms of content. So we've got, a machine to collect that, or everything coming from the field around the world, what is demanded by our clients. And then we prioritize, we select the topics on which we're going to work together with them. So we've got a dozen of priority topics every year, and we select these dozen of priority topics together. And then, of course, in the way that then we're going to produce the content, we work side by side as well, because they're going to have specific needs depending on the type of channel that is going to be selected in the end, right? Whether it's on the app, on .com, or whether it's going to be a full report on PDF, a blog, and so on and so forth. So that is going to have a direct consequence on the type of research we're going to develop throughout the project. So it's really working side by side from the beginning till the end.
Mm-hmm. And you've got these 12 priority topics that you agree on. How do you manage the sort of state and federal tensions within Accenture? In other words, are those the only topics that Accenture publishes on, at least at the center? Or is there thought leadership coming out from all over the firm?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, because if I go back in time a little bit, when I was asked to lead the team called Accenture Research, when we're looking at the rankings in terms of quality thought leadership that are published by third party, and in this case by an organization called Source Global Research, which I'm sure some people know here, Accenture was somewhere in between number 8 or even 17 at some point in time when I was asked to lead the team. Why is that? Because at the time, the diagnosis was that Accenture was doing some top thought leadership, but there was a sea of uneven outputs everywhere across the world. Some of it good, but some of it not so good, not so differentiated, and no consistent voice. And the work I've been doing with a CSO and the CMO of a company since has been to make sure that we've got a consistent voice and that we apply that with rigor and discipline. And that's why we've set up ourselves. My team is technically a global shared service. So we develop at the federal level, to borrow your image, the priorities of the year, and we apply them in a very consistent manner, at least as well as we can, across the board, across the different industries, the different function, the different services we have, and the different geographies as well. So it's really, the point is to be really intentional in the way that we publish thought leadership, and not let everyone do whatever they would like to do, because it's always done with a good intent. But of course, if it's not aligned with the priorities of a company, we may, and it happened unfortunately in the past when I was asked then to take the leadership of a team, is that clients could see that, oh, one team is saying this, another team is publishing that, and you do not seem to be, aligned. And of course, we want to be aligned, and that's part of our commitment to deliver every day.
I want to take a question from the audience here that's sort of a nice segue from what you were just describing. Can you describe the importance of collaboration between researchers, consultants, and also clients in the thought leadership process in your context?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very good question that we put at the core of the development of thought leadership at Accenture, in the sense that we do not want to be in an ivory tower, isolated from the business. That was not the solution taken by Accenture. There used to be a time when there was an organization set up away from the business. We have changed. And the intention, again, right now is to work very closely with consultants. As I was mentioning, every single project has got at least one business sponsor, sometimes several business sponsors, and we develop thought leadership with them. The thing I was told when I joined the company is that I would be a thinker in a world of doers, and that's really what it is, in the sense that Accenture business leaders are predominantly doers. It doesn't mean that they are not thinkers, that they are not thought leaders, of course, but their daily life is about selling and delivering jobs, client engagements, right? And we there as a research team to help them to develop, produce, and disseminate the thought leadership project. So it's really working side by side from the beginning till the end with business leaders, and to the point that on purpose, I recruited lots of former consultants in the research organization. So again, we've got researchers Some of them are very good at, some industry expertise or some research specific skills or tools. Some of them are actually coming from a consulting background because they've got this client intimacy that is absolutely critical if we want at the end of the day to have an impact with our clients. So working with consultants for us is absolutely part of our model, and that's something that we check all the time.
And I love that phrase you described, client intimacy. Do you do those consultants serve as a proxy for the clients? Do you have clients that have input into the development of thought leadership directly, or is it just through the business sponsors and the consulting side?
Yeah, no, the client question is an interesting one. I heard the answer you were yourself sharing last month during your session, and I would say our experience is quite similar to your experience in the sense that we do not involve clients systematically in the production of thought leadership. We tend to include, of course, case studies, and lots of our case studies are based on our own experience and therefore are developed with our own clients, but it's not a condition to develop the thought leadership. So it happens. Of course, when it happens, is intentionally because we think there is something there to be shared that is of interest for other clients, but it's not something that we define in the essence of every single paper that we develop.
Mm-hmm. And you've alluded to this several times, but I just want to be specific about it. I mean, Accenture is a massive organization, right? It's huge, at least relative to McKinsey, it's huge, something like 750,000 people. How do you function? What are the challenges of functioning as a central thought leadership team within such a behemoth organization?
Yeah, it's good fun. It's a good fun. It's all fun. It's all fun. Oh, and I live it myself in my skin in the sense that I'm coming from a country that I cannot hide, right? And the country where I come from, France, of course, amounts to something like 4 to 5% of Accenture. And as such, it has some unique value to bring to the company and some specificities and some specific requests because when you go and visit most of the French clients, they want to have French deliverables. And I've been working myself with clients in French who did not accept the public domain in the public services, did not accept any word in English. So you have to understand the request and you've got to adapt to it, of course, and you've got to get, data which are relevant to a French market, case studies which are relevant to a French market, and so on and so forth. So my point is that working as a global shared service, we have to define global directions, the principles that we're going to implement. Typically, we consider that what is happening these days in terms of artificial intelligence is by no way about getting full automation. We believe in what we call human plus machine, and that's a specific focus that we're going to implement throughout everything that we're going to develop. Now, when it comes to specific publication in France or in Germany, in Italy, or in Japan, of course, we're going to adapt that to the local market. And the same with the different industries and the same with the different functions. So we customize our thought leadership to 13 industries, to 7 functions, to 20 geographies. So there is a machine in the background to make sure that we do that in a way which is not too time consuming, of course, and at the same time, which is impactful in the local market.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because at least in our context, there's, cutting the data for the local market, there's the language issue, there's also the format issue, right? Like some, for example, in Southeast Asia, we're often looking at op-eds versus a longer piece on our own website. There are lots of considerations for those different geographies and different markets. So there's an interesting follow-on here that I think also comes up in our context, sometimes from our own editors, on this question of consistent voice that you mentioned. The question is, I understand the need to focus thought leadership into strong currents of thought or speaking with a consistent voice. But how do you avoid groupthink? The idea that Accenture would have different perspectives on an issue would seem to be a strength. how do you avoid sort of sounding generic if you're adhering to a brand voice?
That's very good. That's a very good question. First of all, I do not want to hide in any way the fact that behind closed doors, we've got lots of very live discussions internally, of course, because we intend to, as I was mentioning, to work across different industries, across different services. So that entails a fair amount of internal discussion before we, decide the way we're going to put some emphasis on some direction versus others. Second, and that's a discussion I have with my marketing colleagues all the time, is that we make a difference between outputs and channels which are more focused on the we voice, meaning the organization, and the channels and the outputs which are more focused on the me voice, if you like. And typically, when I'm writing on a blog right now on a recent research that we published, and the blog is going to be more on the me voice. So I'm going to leverage more about my personal experience, my personal question, what surprised me in the research, what I think is important, and so on and so forth. Similarly, when we go to conferences, we put more emphasis these days about the me voice. And you and I have been into conferences together, and I've been asked a lot to make speeches on sustainability issues. Some of them at a conference we attended together, some of them in other instances. I always start now my speeches on sustainability by being very transparent on my own carbon footprint and the challenges I face in order to reduce it, because it's a way to have a me voice there. Not in any way in contradiction with the type of research that we publish, but to explain who I am, where I am speaking from, and why it matters to me and what I'm doing myself. So in that sense, it's a kind of balance that we try to find between this, we voice and me voice.
Super helpful. Okay, let's turn a little bit to sort of the who, what, where of making your research-driven content happen. So who's your target audience, and has that audience evolved over time, or has it been fairly consistent for Accenture?
Yeah, for Accenture, the target audience are what we call the CXOs, right? The C-level executives. And it has been the case for a long time. That's predominantly at that level. Of course, we've got, we explain to some extent some of the business issues to CIO and people in the tech organization at clients. And the other way around, we explain and articulate some of the consequences of a technology disruption to non-tech executives. Broadly speaking, we work with all the C-level executives and at different functions that you can imagine, CIOs, CMOs, chiefs, and so on and so forth. All these C-level executives. I would say the nuance that we've been bringing in recent years is that with Julie Sweet, we've been working more with CEOs directly than it was the case before. And we've been expanding some of the research that we've been doing with boards. Boards were not necessarily an institution, organization where we had lots of presence in the past, and we've been expanding our presence there.
How do you look at next gen CXOs? Are you doing anything specifically to target up and coming executives that's different from what you do to target CXOs?
Yeah. No, we of course it's part of our audience, but I would not say it's our primary audience. Our primary audience are the C-level executives who are already in the role today, and of course, as some of the outputs that we produce are equally valuable, I would say, for the next generation. There is some tweaks that we can bring in order to adapt some of our outputs to the next generation of leaders, but I would not say that we have a separate line of production, if you like, for the next generation of leaders. It's more adapting what we already do for the current generation.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your research philosophy. You alluded to having a dozen priorities. Can you describe your research methodology for us?
So I would say the research methodology, if I had to put the emphasis on the major points. The first one is that it's data driven. We believe that everything we do has got to be supported by data. That's our role as researchers, is to make sure that business ideas that we develop are supported by data. So we invest and we spend time on strengthening our data and AI foundations of having we have, structured data, unstructured data, synthetic data. This type of data and AI foundation is something absolutely critical to us. And I was mentioning earlier, we want to blend data which are coming from our own experimentation, where we experiment some of the changes on ourselves. Typically, just to mention one example about, this we all focus on generative AI, right, these days. And we've been conducting some experimentation on ourselves with MIT. It led to some publication in MIT Sloan Management and so on and so forth. And that's for us part of our differentiation, is to make sure that we've got not only structured data, which are, kind of expected, but that we consistently produce some new data ourselves. So ourselves, with our own experimentation from clients, as I was mentioning earlier, and then the research that we develop with ourselves or with academia or with ecosystem partners. So for us, this data foundation is critical. The second thing I would say, and that if we, as you were speaking about philosophy, is that I learned from the former generation, right? And my former colleague Paul Nunes was leading thought leadership at Accenture before me, and Paul was for me the ultimate contrarian, and he was extremely pushing ourselves all the time. But there is a difference between the situation and the complication, and that you've got to get the complication right if you want to produce an output which, at the end of the day, is bringing something unique to clients. And to me, that's part of the way we work every day with my colleagues in thought leadership, is never to be complacent on the hypothesis that we develop and getting the complication right.
Francis, can I interrupt you there? I'm not sure everyone in the audience will know that situation complication structure. Do you want to just break that down a little bit for folks in case there are people who obviously this is how we were inculcated, but sometimes I don't think it's everywhere.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, to make it simple, it's for every single topic, it's about analyzing what is going on right now, what are the trends right now, what people agree it's happening right now in the world, and then from that, discuss what are the hypotheses to make about what is maybe not happening yet, but may happen in the future, what is maybe not happening yet, but actually is an underlying thing which may emerge, and maybe some disruption coming on the way. And to me, that's this way of thinking that we refine all the time in order to make sure that what we develop ultimately is going to bring something new, and it's not just going to repeat what has already been done by a competitor, and generally it's well done by a competitor.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we have lots of questions in the chat on sort of formats and content consumption preferences. So let's talk a little bit about that. Folks used to consume thought leadership in very standard ways, long form PDF, or a printed piece of content that was a long report. Used to be very prescribed and consistent and sort of the convention of the genre. Now a little bit more heterogeneous. Just generally, how do you think about storytelling, and how has that approach changed for you at Accenture over time?
Yeah, it's a good point on the storytelling and the different type of channels. My very simple point is that it's a story and end. It's not a story of all, because we've got this in my view, not so helpful discussion about, oh, let's get rid of the long form. Only McKinsey is publishing long form these days, McKinsey Global Institute. Well, actually, I know for a fact it's read by CEOs, and for a good reason, because you can find lots of in-depth information, facts, data that people actually need to believe the conclusion of a report. So that's something we need, and we do publish long form, and we will continue to publish long form at Accenture. Now, is it the only thing that we publish? No, of course not. So the point is what channels you add on top of that, how they complement each other, and how we continuously adapt to the way that people consume content. If I look at the next generation, I teach at a university, so I kind of study students all the time. They look at visuals, they look at videos, right? They're on the social media all the time. So, I would not be surprised that 10 years down the line, we will produce a lot more films than we do today ourselves, because maybe 15 seconds films or maybe 20 seconds film, but that's what people watch these days, right? And we want to be there, and we want our content to be consumed. That's the point of producing it. And for that, it's got to be adapted to the way that people consume content and find them where they are. We still do, and we are keen to publish in very respected reviews like Harvard Business Review. And one of our articles is on the front cover of the latest print edition that everybody can find in the airports or right now. And we're pretty proud of that, because it's an illustration about the fact that our research is serious and is based on facts and data, and is helping leaders to think about what they're going to do, in this case, to embrace Gen AI at work. And of course, we publish data on our app, and of course, we have over types of outputs. So for me, it's always a matter about adding the right channels and the right outputs to make sure that our intent audience is actually watching, listening, or reading our conclusions.
You mentioned your app. For folks who don't know, Accenture has a thought leadership app. I think it's called Foresight. And it's must be a couple of years that you've had that now. Any sort of learnings about your audience or content consumption habits, or the effectiveness of apps as a channel for delivering what is often still long-form content?
Yeah, no, and we learn every day. We learn every day with it. For us, it's a treasure, because we learn about the habits of the audience, of readers, the fact that lots of them put the emphasis on the visuals, on the graphics, typically, rather than reading necessarily the long form there. And so for us, it's bringing lessons every day on the topics that are of interest as well, versus not so much interesting for audience. So for us, it's an excellent source of insight and information, which is helping us then to prioritize the type of outputs we're going to develop, and the type of formats we're going to develop as well.
Have you cracked anything in the video area that's working for you? You mentioned, future potential video strategy. Anything that's particularly working for you now?
Yeah,
it's a little bit tough in our context video, we find. But obviously it's getting traction, to your point, particularly with the new generation as a format. Anything that you see working well?
Well, it's getting lots of traction, and we can testify that. We've got one of our services is called Song, so that's really the digital marketing activities, and they produce lots of videos for clients, right, every day as part of their client engagement, and we can learn from that for ourselves as well. And part of the actions that we've been developing, we've been leveraging the capabilities, their experience, in order to strengthen the way that we can ourselves communicate. So typically in the era of sustainability and corporate citizenship, to some extent, we've developed some videos a year ago that has got a good audience about this island in the Pacific called Tuvalu, which is going to be impacted by climate change. And It was one thing to publish data and to show how dangerous the situation is for this population and for this island. It was another thing to produce a video where you can see, what it may become in the future. And the emotional impact it was far stronger than the impact we could have just by quote unquote publishing some data. So you can touch the emotions of people with that, and of course it's a different area. Going back to what we were mentioning earlier, but the me voice versus the we voice, it's somehow uncomfortable sometimes to speak to emotion because we have to calibrate that in a way which is uh, in line with the positioning of a company and is not hurting anyone and so on and so forth. So we have to calibrate that with lots of care, but we can see that the impact can be pretty strong.
Yeah, I would encourage people to look at that video. I watched it myself, and it was an incredible use case for the metaverse, as I recall. Really interesting and really well done. We have a number of questions on AI. I just want to acknowledge that those are coming in and that we're going to probably visit those at the close or toward the close of this webinar. I want to ask here a question that has come in, which is kind of top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, related to these different, me voice, we voice, touching emotions and so forth. And the question is, how do you balance developing thought leadership that drives substantive conversations with CXOs with those that have the journalistic hook that marketing wants to see to help a piece get picked up? To me, that's like top of the funnel, deep funnel question, but you take it however works.
Yeah. I'm sure you face that every day yourself, Fisha, and it's a very good question. It's a very good question. I don't think there is a silver bullet. It's a matter of finding the right balance for each company, depending on the intent of a company, right? And it happens that Accenture is a listed company. It's a company that has a very famous brand that is constantly developing its brand. That's some of you may have seen ads recently that were developed just a few months ago to help to strengthen the brand of a company. So there is lots of investment going there already. And of course, there is lots of activity in the media as well, just to comment the strategy of a company, comment the financial results of a company, and explain what is going on there as well. So the thought leadership is there to support some of these activities, but as well to acknowledge that some of the activities I've just mentioned are already producing lots of media activities, and therefore the thought leadership, yes, is there to some extent contribute to strengthen the brand, and we can measure what it brings to brand development. Lots of it is there to actually engage with CXOs and originate new discussion with clients of today or clients of tomorrow. So I would say that's where we focus lots of our energy and intent, keeping in mind that, of course, parts of it is there to support the development of the brand, which is already pretty big, as you know.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, let's turn to Gen AI, because that's a big question that you're, I would say, extraordinarily well positioned to answer in your role at Accenture. You mentioned thought leadership about AI, for example, in HBR. How do you see Gen AI affecting thought leadership at Accenture?
I try to learn from a failure I was mentioning at the beginning of the discussion. So I've been very focused on technology and tech innovation for the past decade. And so we are putting lots of emphasis about, first of all, understand the potential of the technology, and second, to implement it on ourselves. And in this case, we are convinced that generative AI is going to completely upend the value chain of thought leadership. So if you go, for the usual value chain from the white space analysis, we've got tools now to do the white space analysis with Gen AI that is going to take a couple of hours, where it used to take a couple of days. So we can see the productivity impact is already measurable and pretty significant at this early stage of any type of thought leadership that we want to develop. Now, if you go to the final stage around the editorial aspect of it, we've got tools. There are tools in the market. We've got internal tools as well, which are already have got a significant impact on the productivity of our own editorial team. We can measure it, we are measuring it, and we can see its material. And so you can see that at both ends, the impact is already material. And of course, then in the middle, which is the production of research, that's where we can get, in my view, the largest productivity impact and creativity impact. And that's typically where we're working right now, experimenting with different ways of doing. Long story short, we're convinced that we're going to show some material productivity impact on our activity because we can already measure it at the project level. So we are confident we're going to measure at the team level. And we're confident as well that we can increase creativity with it. And we've already proven that in some pieces that we publish. So long story short, it's going to change our activity pretty significantly.
Mm-hmm. And how do you manage for the risk that if everyone is using Gen AI throughout the value chain, as you described, including for the white space analysis, that we all don't come out with the same generic result?
Well, no, my hope is no, in the sense that I agree with you up to a certain point, in the sense that I'm convinced that with generative AI, we make the production of thought leadership easier to some extent. So it's an equalizer, right? It's democratization of the access to thought leadership to some extent, because it's making it easier. So suddenly, lots of companies, lots of individuals can actually produce something which is going to be pretty good, or at least will meet the quality standards of what we can see in the market. And the question will be, how can you enhance the differentiation and where we've been, people can access the threshold, can access the floor. Where do we put the ceiling? How can we elevate the ceiling with generative AI? And that's where we are focused on ourselves. And that's where we are convinced that we can achieve a pretty significant results. I mean, typically, one example that we have seen in the past 2 years, as your company, my company, others, were focused about assessing the impact of generative AI on jobs and on tasks, for instance. There were things that we could achieve in a timely manner with AI and generative AI at the core of the modeling that we could not achieve before. And that was a way to get some competitive edge at some point in time. And of course, only for 15 minutes, but we know that the competitive advantage is going to last for 15 minutes only, but for 15 minutes, we had this competitive advantage there. And we are confident that with what we are developing in terms of our own internal tools, in terms of our own internal data, we can actually produce in the future thought leadership that is going to be differentiated and in a timely manner.
I fully agree with you. I find it jaw-dropping, but there are skeptics and there are folks who resist. Do you have difficulty with adoption of these tools internally within your organization?
Happily, I would say no, in the sense that what we've been doing is that now for 7 years, we've been recruiting data scientists because we've been, before generative AI, we've been working on AI and with AI for a long time. And so as we've been ramping up the team of data scientists within our own team, it was a way to actually develop the tools which are adapted to our work. It was a way to test external tools as well, to develop partnership with some of the providers which are very famous in terms of generative AI. And enable the adoption of people internally. Because as usual, people always focus about, well, generative AI is about investing in technology. Yes, it is about investing in tools and technology, but we consider that it's, at the max, it's only 1/3 of investment, because at least 2/3 of investment is about upskilling people, reskilling people, opening the possibilities to get some trainings and so on and so forth. So for me, it's really about that. It's a transformation. As any transformation, we have to be intentional about the way we lead it, about the way we implement it. It's not going to happen by coincidence, but I mean, it depends as well, I guess, on the DNA of a company. We're lucky enough at Accenture that we've always been working at the intersection of business and technology. So there is an appetite for this new tool, which is, really ingrained in the DNA of a company.
I would think that this would be particularly helpful if there are folks in our audience who have smaller teams. Accenture has a large team, McKinsey has a large team. We have longer and more established thought leadership programs, but in more of a startup or a leaner organization, it would seem like these could really make a huge difference in the efficiency of what you're able to do with a smaller staff.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would even take it the other way around, Lucia, in the sense that for someone setting up a thought leadership organization or activity these days, I would advise start with AI, start with Gen AI. No, do not start the traditional way. Start with AI first, because for me that's the way you can build a capability that is going to be differentiated in the future and is going to be competitive, because your organization is investing, my organization is investing in these things, and that means that's where to start, in my humble view.
Yeah, it will be table stakes, that is for sure. So speaking of this, how do you see thought leadership changing over the next decade? What do you think it will look like, say, if you and I are here talking 10 years from now? What will we be talking about? How will it look different?
I hope we can talk again in 10 years, Lucia, and contemplate what's been happening. I would say some of the things that we've been mentioning today. First of all, more technology. I'm convinced now that technology waves are coming faster, stronger. The current innovation that we're going through is certainly not the last one of a decade. There are going to be some more coming. Think about quantum, for instance, right? And others, which are still largely unknown by most business leaders. So first of all, to me, it's more technology waves coming that we'll have to absorb and use in the way we're going to work. Second, as we were speaking earlier, I think it's more about the emotions, how we connect and contact our audience, and for that, as we were mentioning earlier, films having an original voice, speaking about oneself is going to be part of a solution as well at some point. So these are the things that I can see. I can see coming, probably getting stronger in the coming decade. Now we shall see, of course. Yeah.
And talk to us, you flagged your piece in HBR, but are there any interesting pieces of research on the radar that you're particularly proud of or excited about, and that you want to flag for our audience between now and, say, the beginning of 2025?
We got as lots of our esteemed competitors an agenda of publication that is coming. Of course, I will mention the last one that actually we published 2 days ago, which is about what we call hidden workers, that we published with Harvard Business School with Professor Joe Fuller over there and Senior Director Manjari Raman, because to me, it's as well what we can bring to our own world, in the sense that with Joe and Manjari, what we study is, when we speak about hidden workers, is workers who can be actually hidden from recruiters who are using these new AI tools, because these people have got either not the right education, or they were out of the labor market and it shows on their resume, or they do not have the right profile, so that to be selected by the AI engines that lots of recruiters are using these days. And by putting the emphasis on some of these hidden workers, I hope we can help clients and our communities to actually focus on that, and always in terms of these technology changes, which are pretty exciting for all of us, think about those who can actually not be victim of it, but not profit from it. And in this case, the last one is about what we call caregivers. So those who care about, siblings, children, older generation, more and more, and how they are impacted in their position in the labor market and what companies can do about it. So this one I'm particularly proud of it right now because it's not something which is necessarily expected from Accenture, but we care as well about these who are the categories of citizens or population who are not necessarily winners with all these new technologies if we're not careful. And of course, we've got more coming on AI and Gen AI down the line, as you can expect.
Of course, of course. And folks should find that on your website, yes? Folks should
Absolutely.
find that. Yeah, that sounds super interesting. Okay, last question for you, Francis. You and I are both on this advisory board of GTLI, the Global Thought Leadership Institute, which is newly formed. Tell me, why is GTLI important to you, and what impact do you hope that it will have?
Well, I hope it will have a great impact. So why it's important to me, first of all, it's about the quality. Lots of the mission I have at Accenture is to make sure that we produce high quality thought leadership. And that's what I like in the mission of the Institute is to really define what is high quality thought leadership, define the standards of high quality thought leadership and avoid the commoditization that otherwise this activity may face in the coming months and years. So that I particularly like. The second point that I particularly like is that we can help colleagues, we can help people who are interested to develop or use thought leadership, to actually develop thought leadership or use it. And there is an element of evangelization, an element of education, and there is an element of growing the next generation. As I mentioned earlier, I benefited myself from the stewardship of previous leaders in my company. The more I can now pass on the torch to the next generation, some of it in my company, I do it every day, but through the Institute, doing it for the ecosystem, it's something I'm really interested in, and I'm passionate about that because I believe in the future of thought leadership, and that means that we play a role as much as we can to help the next generation to grow their own skills and their own way of doing, right. And the last reason is the community, the sense of belonging to a community and exchange together and challenge each other. And as I was mentioning to you before we started this session, I'm reading your last book, Lucia, because I'm always super interested in what you do. And I'm doing the same for our esteemed competitors. We learn from each other all the time. And this sense of belonging to a community is important to me as well, to learn. I believe in, lifelong learning. And for me, it's a way to continue to learn. And I hope we will have fun as well when we meet in February in Houston.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel all those ways as well. So folks, if you're out there for more about upcoming events hosted by the Global Thought Leadership Institute, including both future webinars and this right here that's on screen, our first annual live IRL convening this coming February in Texas. Visit the APQC website again at apqc.org/GTLI to find out more and to register. We'd love to see you there. Francis, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to talk with you as always.
Thank you, Lucia. And I saw a comment from Bob Bude, and I wanted to acknowledge Bob because Bob played a role in the people who inspired me. Bob is one of them. So many thanks to him.
Likewise, a long-standing practitioner in the field. And thanks, of course, to everyone in our audience. See you in November when we will talk with Liz Bolshow, who leads Global Content Strategy at EY. And you'll have another shot in December for Jeff Potter, who leads Advisory Insights for KPMG. So have a great day or evening and be well.